Growth Pains.
All right, let's do this. So, hey everyone, welcome to this new episode of Growth Pains. Today, me and my guest will be talking about work-life balance in a fast-paced environment, missing human connection when working remotely, dealing with hyper-growth expectations, and hiring well and fast. My guest today is John Almeida. He's the first guest so far that I've actually worked with side by side. He's also my lost twin because we were born on the same day at the same year. He in Sri Lanka, I was born in Chile. So John now works as the enterprise product lead at Miro. And before he was leading the product team at Start, where he had to deal with this annoying marketer. And before that at Improve Digital. So, hey man, nice to have you here, Papa John. Welcome.
Thanks, Nacho. Good to be here. Excited to be on the show.
Yeah, man. Thanks for joining. It's I'm really excited to have, like, first of all, a person that knows me well. You can call on all my bullshit, and I can always edit it later if I don't like what you say. But just feel free to go for it. We're gonna start with the true or false, right? Let me see to start warming it up. So the first one is, Nacho is the brightest marketer you've ever worked with. True or false?
I'm going to go false for the laugh.
God damn it. Come on. Can you just say yes now, and then I edit it and put that in?
But in reality, yes.
Thank you.
One of the best ones I've worked at.
Thank you. I'm just going to leave that part in. Okay, the next one. Most highly impactful growth opportunities lie within product and not marketing. True or false?
I take a balanced approach to this because I think product can have a very immediate impact, right? With doing things. So you can really, if you change the user behavior or give customers a great experience, it helps kind of later in marketing of how you tell a story.
Right, but that's the not pissing off marketers, right? That's the approach to not piss off marketers. What's it?
Yeah, but the thing is, marketing takes a while, right? So taking that kind of space in people's minds of where you are takes a while.
Yeah.
It takes a long time. It takes repeated messaging. So to answer your question, I think the quicker path is probably product, but I
would actually agree that a lot of them lie in product. The act of this one, by the way, was crowdsourced. I called one of your former colleagues. So a shout out to 𝐇𝐨𝐬𝐿 for giving me this one. You can just complain about it with him later.
I'm scared now.
The act of product strategy is really doing research, outlining assumptions, risk, your competitive advantage, and eventually coming up with an informed set of choices. True or false? Is that how you view product strategy?
I would say for the most part, true. That captures it, yeah.
Because he was also telling me that there's a big bulk of people that are like starting to see it like calling the shots. Sort of like being the ones that run the show and don't realize there's a lot of like so much research and so much like work behind calling those shots before you get straight to it. Is this something that you've seen like working in different teams? This kind of attitude?
Yeah, I mean, you definitely have to, product, you always have to roll your sleeves and understand, you can't do everything. There's trade-offs. You have to understand what your customers want and what you have to build, and and there's a refinement process with that, right? So what your customers want and what you need to build is two different things, right? It's the old repeated phrase of Ford would have given people horses, right? Like faster like that, like it just that whole phrase, like you need to go through this process and refinement and understanding. So I think. For product, there you come up with a hypothesis, right? And then you refine that hypothesis, and then you create a strategy around that. But I don't think it's all about just like telling people what to do and where to go, right? It's you always have to kind of center yourself back to the basics.
Yeah. All right. The last one. It's harder to try to make up for the product's faults with marketing than it is to fix the product in the first place. True or false?
So it's harder to
make up for the product's faults with marketing than it is to fix the product in the first place.
I would say false.
All right. Okay. Yeah. Because you earlier, just a few minutes ago, you were saying how sometimes marketing can take a bit longer, right? And I stole this one from Sujan Patel. He was in the last episode, and I kind of rephrased it. Because I'm interested in your approach, because basically we all think that we get the raw end of the stick, right? We all think that our job is the hardest kind of thing. So I wanted to hear like a product view on it. Marketing always complains that we have to make up for faults in the product with marketing, kind of covering them up. But you have a different view about this one. It would be a bit easier to correct it with marketing than with product changes.
Well, I think, with marketing, it's your storytelling, right? And again, storytelling is a bit easier, but it takes more time, right? So you need to repeat the story. You need to tell people over and over again how it is. With product, there's a lot of there's definitely kind of this process of you're dealing with resources, with development, with structure, and every product is different, right? And every team is different. So there's companies where you have a lot of resources, you have structures that are scalable, and there are some where you're working within a confined, restricted product, right, where you don't get the flexibility. So like it's not as easy to make that impact in a quick way. So so if you're looking at where you can kind of get the most bang for the buck immediately, in my mind, right away, it would be marketing.
I mean, the pain there would be that eventually, if you just get used to that and you never actually improve the product as the marketing makes up for it, then is where you go in the loop of like trouble, right? Like when you just say, okay, marketing has this under control, we can just delay it, and eventually it doesn't hold forever, right? So marketing can like support initially, it's quicker, but then product has to catch up with that effort to deliver as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think us in product, we always talk about technical debt, and I think that applies to other parts of the business too, right? There's this marketing debt, there's this storytelling debt that you put yourself in.
Yeah.
And you can only, at the end of the day, bullshit your customers so much. I think marketing buys you time in a way. But,
that's a good way to put it, right?
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, you still have to deliver, and it's all about kind of coordinating that, kind of what the timeline is, what that story is. As long as you're going there, right? It's fine to kind of work with marketing to get the story out there quicker. But yeah, you have to deliver on the product side, the user experience side.
All right, let's start getting into the painful terrain. Like, what is one thing that you would like to highlight before we get into the pains that you think you're really, really bad at when it comes to work?
So what's the kind of biggest pain I have, or the biggest?
I mean, something that you just feel like you're just honestly bad at, right? Like it's not even a pain because of any circumstances. It's just something that you just struggle with and have struggled with for a while.
Yeah, I think the one that I've struggled with is just taking on too much. I think another way to put it on is another angle on that is focus.
Yeah.
But I look at it as taking on too much. I think initially you get excited by a lot of ideas, a lot of things, and you think, okay, I'm going to drive projects and drive initiatives. But it all takes time. There's always trade-offs, right? So that's something I'm continuing to refine, right? So even I used to have this kind of guilt if I didn't read a certain newsletter or a blog post, right?
Yep. Like that FOMO.
That kind of FOMO. And then finally, I asked myself once, why am I doing this, right? So you need to kind of also kind of do an audit of these things once in a while. So for that example specifically, I put everything in a reading folder, right? And if I have time, I go there and read it. But I don't feel guilt that this thing is there, that I have to read it, I have to make time for it.
Yeah.
And that applies to work as well, right? You have to take on things, and sometimes the things that are very important, you have to really have deep thought, deep focus, deep work, and that those things take time. So you can't take on everything. Otherwise, you're going to half-ass the other things.
Yeah, it's a struggle for me as well. I think we are both a little bit more prone to saying yes than to saying no, right? When something comes your way, you're like, hey, sure, man, I'll help you out. And then eventually you realize that your day only has 8 hours, and that practically out of those 8 hours for real, like focus work, maybe is half of it, if you're lucky. And then you start realizing how important it is to say no to things and taking on less, right? But it's difficult. I think when you're a bit hardwired to just always like cooperate with things, I also struggle with that one, but I think it's very valuable. You were mentioning also when we were ping-ponging emails about the pains, work-life balance. right? Especially in a very fast-paced environment, because right now you joined Miro at a very pivotal point, right? And the pandemic did nothing but make you guys grow way faster, which is one of those rare companies that has been just booming with the situation right now, because it basically bases its offering in remote working. And this must have been a pretty big change for you. I can imagine that, of course, now you're working from home, but work-life balance, how was that affected in this new faster paced environment compared to what we were doing together at start?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's funny, right? Like I've heard the phrase that, now instead of going to work, you're living at work. And that's how I feel sometimes, right? That it's easy to kind of always stay connected and not have that balance.
Yeah.
And also, there's a couple things with that. One, there's this certain guilt that, okay, if your company is growing or doing well, and you see kind of the world around you of companies not doing well, people losing their jobs, you want to keep working harder, you want to keep contributing and doing more. I think we're both the type of people, we're not going to complain, we're just going to, kind of feel gratitude for what we have. So that's part of it. And so, but at the end of the day, you need to kind of have this fine line of separation. And I think it was easier, right, during, let's say, pre-pandemic, where you go to your office and you're interacting there, and then you come home, and sometimes there were those days where it bled into like kind of your personal life, but those are kind of few and far between. And now I think that there's just more of it. And from talking to other colleagues and friends, I think I think this whole work-life balance is an issue right now.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of positives also with that come with as you mentioned, with like working from home, right? So it's all kind of this fine line.
Yeah, that was my next question, right? Because a lot of people, well, technically we have more time for personal life. If you look at it rationally, like we stay more at home, you're not commuting, you have actually more time to spend with your wife or other things. But a lot of people are seeing that is even more difficult than we were not remote, right? You also joined the company, and recently, and as a new joiner in an environment of like high expectations, you also might feel like you need to prove yourself more in the beginning. Right. But the problem with that is that when you do that a lot in the beginning, then that's a door that's hard to close when you've opened it too much. Right. Like people expect, if you're that guy that answers like after 2 seconds that you get a message, and you'll answer a Slack message at like 11 p.m. or whatever, that's where you also set the expectations. Right. In the first few weeks, have you been trying to not fall into that trap? Right. Because you set those expectations, is maybe you get like 2 weeks and then you set them, and then it's really hard to change them, right? Because people get used to it.
Yeah, no, it's definitely tough, right? So I think one of the things is just kind of having those boundaries of when you're let yourself rest and kind of walk away, So I think it's important, especially as everyone's in this environment for the next for the foreseeable future, that you have this separation of work and life in your house, because even with notifications, like Slack, I'll see a message from a colleague in the San Francisco office, and it's 11 p.m. here in Amsterdam, and without even blinking, I'll just reply because it's easy to do. But what happens is that you're creating that habit, and I think it's just important to set boundaries there, and have a bit of balance, and especially now, you think, okay, I'm home, I'm saving all this time, but we're seeing now statistically, like people are taking less holidays there because they just think, okay, I'm home and things like that. But it's still important to have that balance,
Yeah, and also something that people might not know, you just mentioned it, but you guys work across different time zones, right? So you have a team in Russia, and then you have a team in LA. And for those who don't know that are listening, we're based both in Amsterdam. And with LA, I think it's like a 10-hour difference or something like that. So basically, when you're not working, they're working, right? Yeah. How do you manage to set up work in such a way that you can still respect your personal time? Because I can imagine, as you say it, right? Like if there's a blocker, you would feel basically like an ass for not saying, hey, I can unblock you. It's easy. But you can only do that to an extent. If you just keep doing that, then you don't even realize it, and you're working until 10 p.m. every day. Is this something that you guys have discussed with the team and have found some sort of process that allows you to set up work in a way that your intervention is not needed so often?
Yeah, I think we're big on kind of synchronous and asynchronous work, defining those boundaries, and obviously we have a tool that is made for that to enable people to do that. So a lot of it is how do we set expectations with each other and work in a way that we don't burn each other. There's obviously overlaps, right? There are times where we need to speak face to face, and I think we've established kind of predictable, let's say, meetings or rhythms where we know, okay, on Monday we're meeting here, or on Wednesday this is a late meeting, right?
Yeah.
But I think what's the hard thing is it can bleed over very easily, right? Like your day can easily go into the evenings, into the late nights, and before you know it, you're working 15, 18 hours and you're not thinking about it. But so it goes back to those couple of things of boundaries, of setting expectations, learning. I think the big thing now is people learning how to work asynchronously, right? The norm is synchronous work. I can walk over, talk to you,
which must be tricky for the kind of work that you do, right? I can imagine for marketing in particular, where I make so many like micro decisions on like every hour, right? Like, hey, what do you think about this? What do you think about the other? Like, you can set up a good briefing, you can set up the project really thoroughly, but at some point you're going to have to step in through the day, right? Or have you guys found a good formula there?
Well, I think the biggest thing, to be honest with you, is that it makes communication even more critical, right? So you can see if someone really doesn't communicate well across teams or isn't clear in their communication, and I think that's for everyone. That's kind of it's a personal journey. You can always get better at communication. There isn't one. You're not going to wake up one day and say, okay, that's it, I'm the best communicator, right? There's always an evolution because you're always dealing with someone else. That's the one thing that's been exposed, I think, with all of this, is that everyone's communication style is different, and you need to evolve and learn and actually do it faster than you probably are comfortable with. So,
but that's a really good point, right? Because when you're in the office and you send that ambiguous email that is like not that easy to understand, and you just wrote it in a rush or whatever, you always know in the back of your head that you could just get up your desk and like solve the situation. But now that you cannot, especially when you're in different time zones, right? And if you want to keep that work-life balance, then that means that those 2-3 emails that you're going to send through the day, you better damn sure they're easy to understand and they don't bring up more hesitation, right? Because you want to make sure that they don't require you after that. So it forces you to be more thorough.
Yeah, and I think of how many meetings I put on your calendar or an email I sent, and I walked right over and explained what I meant by that, right, in the office. And you don't get that chance, right? So that's also that's been just this new thing that I've had to learn. I know other people have had to learn, and I think it's going to be like in the new norm.
I annoyed my team so much, so we started like having some sort of like a flag on your desk so nobody could just come and annoy you and just interrupt you and stuff like that. But I never managed, and then Corona hit. But when we come back to the office, I'm definitely gonna fight for that little flag that nobody comes over to my desk. In terms of the other side that comes with this is human connection, right? And that's the other pain that we wanted to discuss. I mean, you guys at Miro, I think by culture, even before Corona, have a pretty big like working remote and distributed team culture, right? This is the way you're set up, different time zones and all of this stuff. But for most of us, there's some human interaction that is like what gets you pumped and you need to get going. And I think you and I were frequent Starbucks around the corner meetings and stuff like that will just get you motivated and a bit more inspired. How are you coping with that lack of this human interaction factor, which is hitting quite a few of us? The longer it gets, the worse it gets, right?
Yeah, it's definitely a tough one. It's one thing. It's a thing that I didn't realize how much I enjoyed or missed, let's say, until the pandemic, right? Because I think just little things like getting a coffee with a coworker or having lunch, or our Friday beers that we used to have, right? Like and asking how your week was. You kind of miss those kind of micro interactions, which do add up, and so that is definitely something I felt. And then also, like with Miro, we're growing, right? So we've hired a lot of people, a couple hundred people, and Amsterdam office has I think tripled in size. And for me personally, from working at other scale-ups, you get an energy from them. There's an energy from new people joining, and you see the company grow, right? And when you don't see each other face to face, you kind of, even though there's this excitement that the company is growing, you kind of miss out on that energy of new people coming in and getting to know them. And so yeah, it's definitely a huge issue, and it's also hard because right now I think everyone's on these kind of, let's get Zoom fatigue or Zoom schedule.
Yeah.
Right? You're going into back-to-back meetings. Your day is just a lot of context switching, and like simple things like when you start a meeting, if you ask, hey, how was your weekend, or what do you have any plans for the week? We don't do that anymore, right? You just kind of get into work, and I think it's important now. Even we've done this even with team stand-ups. Is you can join 15 minutes early. The meeting starts at 10 a.m., but we have the call open at 9:45.
Yeah.
And you can just join and just kind of talk about your day or whatever. And I think it's important to kind of build that into your rhythm of meetings, and try to recreate a little bit of that connection. You're not going to get it obviously, but to at least feel a little bit of that human connection, I think is very important at this point.
Yeah, and I mean, this might be a stereotype, right? But my experience also, like product teams or like when you have more people in engineering or developers or so on, those people sometimes are more into this idea of just like being left alone and just working like completely focused and not having that much social interaction. They're just like, leave me to my code kind of thing. In marketing, that's a bit easier because we're a bit all more like silly and we're better at wasting our time. But I think that must also be really hard because there are some people that are like, amazing, I'm gonna log myself in and code all day. See you guys in 2021. And then as a manager, you're also like, dude, but what about that, that original like 20-minute like little Zoom thing just to keep the vibe going? And some of them just don't care, right? Like, has that been an issue sometimes with some of your coworkers or in the past when you've done this kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, in the past, like, I think there are people that really enjoy kind of this, the whole work from home situation and kind of that big separation. But yeah, I mean, I think especially if you're a product manager, a lot of your interaction is working with development or design or analytics teams to kind of form that relationship, because there's always deadlines you're running through. There's always short-term and long-term projects you're working on. And, I think in the last 10 years, I don't know how many developers I bought a beer for, right? Hey, if you can get this done, I'll buy you a beer on Friday. And it works, it definitely works. And that's how you kind of, in a funny way, build relationships. And that's real. That's like a real part of working together, right? And I think it happens more often than people realize. And you just got to find a way to recreate it in some way if you can,
But from my perspective, there's also a little bit of an upside on this one, right? Because, I mean, to be honest, I've also found myself like sometimes much more productive doing this whole like separation, because in the past I used to have like my huddle with my team. We would meet for a few minutes, and then my hope would be that everything would be solved in those few minutes, and then my day would just be super focused, right? But in reality, I would just get interrupted all the time and stuff like that because it's easy because you're just there, right? So it's like, hey, let's grab a coffee. Let me tell you this, the other. I'm not a big fan of open plan offices. I'm one of those people that misses the cubicle. Don't hate me for it, but I think it's just a fantastic invention. But how do you feel about this? Do you feel like, have you also seen yourself like having a bit of a productivity boost? Not in working more hours, but in actually getting more done in your time?
I mean, I think there's, you can, like for me personally, I can take on a lot more and kind of, when you're productive, right? So let's look at it that way, right? Like for me, like in the mornings, I know I can be super productive. So before even I get into stand-ups, I tend to like just kind of get on and do a lot of deep focus work. And then I know as soon as I have my daily and some meetings in the afternoon, that it's not going to be as productive, right? So you can kind of pick and choose when the time periods where you feel like you can have the best output, right? So, and that's not necessarily like, if you think about it, those mornings I typically would have been spending, getting ready for work and, going to work, and now I can use that in a different way, right? So, so again, I think it's kind of using using this whole opportunity in a different way to put yourself in a good position. So yeah, there are spots where I definitely feel like super productive, where I haven't had that in the past, and there are some spots where I feel like, hey, this is about the time I would get up and grab a coffee with a coworker, or if I talk about an issue or something, and those are you can't do that anymore. If somebody's Zoom, you look at their calendar and they have multiple Zoom calls, right? You don't have that spontaneous interaction anymore.
Yeah, I think honestly, I mean, what's interesting is that, well, we tend to romanticize this idea of like the team and so on, and we love it, but also to like, no matter how good your workplace is, like at some point there are also people in companies, and that happens in most companies, that are not that much of a positive energy, that also drain your energy, right? You can also have, maybe not all the time, but in situations, certain projects, you might have coworkers that like really like, dude, like that really drain you, and so you can control that better in a work from home environment. Have you thought about what your sweet spot looks like moving forward in 2022 or whatever the hell we get rid of this virus? Like, what does it look like? Would you like to go home a few days, then work from the office a couple? What do you think you'll find your sweet spot?
Yeah, no, it's something I've deeply thought about, and also asked others as well. And I think this kind of, if you have the ability to have the flexibility, I think, is the biggest thing, right? So just in the back of your mind, if you can do like have this, you can work from home or go in the office. There's a freedom in the way you feel that you get a big benefit from. But realistically, in practice, I would say something where I could go to the office 2 days a week, let's say, and maybe work from home 3 would be this great balance, and those 3 days I could really kind of schedule it out to be deep focused work, and in the office it's about interaction, it's about meeting, it's about really kind of FaceTime with people and getting to know them a bit better, right? So I think in an ideal world it would be this balance where you could kind of go in either 2 days a week or 3 days a week, and then or vice versa with home. So yeah.
And what's tricky, it's because also you guys are at a stage right now, and this is like moving over to like the next pain, which is dealing with like hyper growth expectations, right? I had before also Rand Fishkin in the first episode, and we discussed kind of like what it means to take venture and how that really puts some pressure on businesses, right? You guys have raised, if I'm not wrong, about 76 million, and you guys actually raised the bulk of that, like 50 million, right after you joined. Right, so like maybe a month or something after you join. So no money is free in life, and that comes with incredible growth expectations, right? Like the way VCs work, they really have their chips in a few like star companies in their system, and they really want those to not, 100% year on year is not enough anymore. Like you really need to just like bring it to 400, 500, and God knows what it takes to become a unicorn in 2022, right? So how are you coping with that challenge? Because that's certainly a change from what you've done in the past, which has been like, sure, there's been growth and so on, but like a bit more in standard levels, right? Not in these unicorn levels.
Yeah, I mean, there's expectations, right? So, you're always kind of looking at everything around scalability, pushing it to the next level, and there's a couple of layers to this, right? So one, for you to grow, you need people, right? So you need to hire at scale, you need to bring people on. There's a lot of work to be done. So you're shifting focus into really doing interviews in volume and trying to get people in the pipeline to help you strategize. The other side of this is that as you're doing well with revenue, the expectation is actually, oh great, you're growing 100% this year, you need to grow 200%.
It's crazy how that goes, right? Like there's just this thing that we freaking humans have, that like the first time you grow 100% one year, you're like psyched about it. And then the next year, that already feels like crap, and it has to be 150. And then and when you get venture, those expectations are even harder.
Yeah, and I've talked to kind of revenue officers at other VC funded firms, and had the same conversation. I said, hey, wow, like you guys are growing extremely fast. Congratulations. And they're like, yeah, it's great, but I know already next year I'm going to have to up the game, and I gotta figure out where that's gonna come from, right? So so with that, I think everything around growth is there's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of pressure to expand the team, to execute your current strategy, to create a new strategy, and then all the while you're kind of like improving your product, learning from customers, right? So there's a lot of things going on, and so that's that's part of it where you can get a lot of. I think I always say there's two type of people, like with growth companies, especially hypergrowth. You either kind of get energy from it or it takes energy away from you, like. And this is from working at previous companies as well that were VC funded. Like you're either in one of those two buckets, right? And so you got to figure out kind of where you're going to get your energy from in this, because it is definitely a grind. It's a lot of work, right? And hopefully there's this kind of reward there, which is also another kind of topic and story. But yeah, I mean, that's just like kind of the expectations of it, and I think. From the outside looking in, people think, okay, wow, that sounds amazing, that's great, but it's real work. There's a lot of people putting in a lot of hours, and I know I have a lot of hardworking colleagues and a lot of smart colleagues, and that's real at the end, and like that's the part that people kind of forget.
Well, it's like everything, right? When you just watch your favorite TV show or whatever, you're like, oh, this must be a blast to make it, but to actually make it, it's a lot of work, right? And when people look at these companies, that the Teslas or whatever that are growing like crazy, you're always like, ooh, that must be so fun to work in that company. And sure, it's fun, but it's also demanding as hell, right? And it's really busy. I think. If I'm not wrong, since you joined, you guys have kind of like basically doubled in employees since you joined, right? And that's been 6 months ago or 7 months ago or something like that. So exactly. That's a crazy amount. So one thing is the company expectations, right? So we all know where you want to be in revenue. That's like the overall North Star of the company. And another thing are interdepartmental expectations at this like hyper growth stage, right? How do you manage with such a fast growing team that those don't get lost along the way, right? Because it's like for every person that comes in, and the team comes in, you have to say, okay, so this is our expectations. You have to have really good documentation or something that people can catch up with. How do you manage so there's not a disalignment there? Because when there's a disalignment, that's where conflict happens, right? That's when you can get into trouble.
Yeah, I think structurally, the leaders in each of these groups need to figure out a way of working. And as you alluded to, we've doubled in size, so things are constantly changing, right? And we're going to, double again, right? So I think the most important thing is, even if the leadership has aligned on things, is that you continue to revisit everything over and over again. And it's a bit annoying, right? That if you set a process or structure in place, that maybe 6 months down the line you have to revisit it. But the reality is, if your organization is operating the same when it's 250 people, 500 people, and then 1,000 people, that's not true. That's never going to happen, right? People are people. They will add complexity. They'll add a layer of things, of decision making. And I think most companies, including us, we try to avoid any sort of hierarchy or bureaucracy. But that's just a natural element of growing a company. And I think it's just important to revisit everything over and over again, and even have people that are looking at it full time, right? So they're looking at engineering excellence or product excellence, or all those things, and revisiting the structure.
Yeah, because also what's tricky about this hypergrowth mindset, which obviously it must be very rewarding in one way, but the thing is that growing is not only based on acquisition of new customers, right? So maximizing revenue from the existing customers that you have, it's also an essential part on this, maybe even more essential than acquiring more. And in this obsession for growth, there's also the temptation to pursue tactics that are maybe not so customer centric, that might create revenue. Right? The whole growth hacking thing, you can easily say, hey, what if we just, instead of giving this part of the product for free, we start charging for it now? Oh, nice. And you can add some. What if we just up the pricing in a few euros and nobody will know, but that, because we have a lot of customers, that's a little bit more money, right? And you can go in a bit of a snowball here, on which eventually your customers go like, you know what? Fuck it. I've had it. And you don't see that coming. It just comes when it comes. You don't see it building up. is this something that you guys are very aware of? Because I think until this point, you guys have been very customer centric, right? And I think the product is really focused around the customer. But as you grow, that temptation will grow with you because there's going to be growth opportunities in those little tactics. How do you think you're going to resist those?
Yeah, I think it's all about maintaining that that customer obsession, right? I know a lot of companies say it, but to really do it, there has to be a high bar, and that's something I think at Miro I've seen done in a world-class way is this really customer obsessiveness, creating a structure and process where everything is looked at from the customer's eyes. You have to go in and prove your hypothesis with real evidence from a customer's point of view. So there's no kind of one person's voice is influencing things, or one big customer's want is influencing anything. So it's really looking at it very holistically, and taking that approach. But at some point you also have to have this fine line of fine balance between experimentation as well, right? So there's things you want to experiment with, right? So whether it's how you package your plans, or package a set of features, and I think that you should, as long as you can kind of honestly say that you're doing these things with this customer intent in mind, for value of customers, I think that's fine. If it ever becomes a question of does it help the customer, that's when I think you should really slow down and say, is this the right thing to do? And that's when like you said, there's these temptations that can happen and it can occur, and then there's probably these signals that you'll see coming in that these leading indicators of maybe we should stop it and think about this. We've gone way too far, right? But there's always a balance between those two areas. Yeah,
because one of the biggest signs of this is that your free product is already very, very, very generous, right? So it's a very generous product, and at some point, when you have the level of acquisition you guys have, then it will become natural for somebody to say, hey, maybe we might be giving this too much for free. We could charge for this, and there's revenue options here. And as you say, that line is very thin, right? Of course, you have to maximize your revenue opportunities, but it can very easily go in the direction of annoying loyal people and loyal users, because some of those free users, for example, might not even become paying customers ever, but maybe they brought in 2 other paying customers by word of mouth, right? And that's probably a hard temptation to resist. But I wanted to dig deeper a little bit on the hiring, because you just mentioned a little bit before, you guys you don't only need to hire a lot, you need to hire really fast, right? Because you have really fast expectations of keeping growing. How many people are you thinking about hiring, or how many have you hired, and how many are you about to hire in the next few months or in the next time period?
Yeah, I think so. When I started the company, it was around 250 people. We've hired about 250 in the last So
and in your team personally, how fast is that moving?
Yeah, in the team, I think there were 8 people. Now it's going to be close to 15 people, and then that'll also continue to grow to probably 20, 25 people.
Okay, so this is a really interesting pain for me, because I've had this pain even hiring at a very small scale, right? You're just feeling that it's taking a lot of their day. I'm one of those managers that it's also very into execution. I just go and get my hands dirty if needed. I'll just do this and the other. And hiring, even when we were hiring a few people, it would take a significant chunk of my day, right? So how are you accommodating that? Because I can imagine that this by default could be taking a significant chunk of your time.
Yeah, it's a great question, actually. So I think initially for me, I think my default was kind of going into this execution mode, right? So I can help right away, I can do things right away, and then you realize after a while that you're going to hit a wall, that if you're doing everything, then other things can't happen. And then this goes back into the first thing we talked about of taking on too much, right?
Yeah.
There's things I want to do, but you just need the time to do it. So for that to happen, you realize very quickly you need to actually dedicate. Hiring should be kind of one of the number one things you do. And I think it's hard because instinctually people are, they like to execute. They kind of stay in this comfort zone.
Yeah.
So I think just making it a priority, right, and establishing it. So for example, what the one thing I've done in the mornings is the first thing I do is look through my hiring pipeline, and so either go through candidates or test cases or scheduling with HR, right? So it's the first thing I do.
That's really interesting because for most of us that's like your dashboard, right? Like your analytics dashboard or something like that, or like my SQLs or whatever it is. And for you, it's actually such a priority that it's the top thing on your mind.
Yeah, and I learned this the hard way, right? I'm not saying this is something that instinctually just came to me. It was something where it was easy for me to just focus on the work side of it, and then you realize after a while it can't be a secondary thing that you do. Otherwise, it's just never going to get traction. And I noticed right away that as soon as I put focus on in it and really kind of dedicated time to it every day, that it made a huge difference. There was like this really ripple effect of what was happening in the pipeline of as far as who we were screening and who was getting through the process, and so it's just a matter of kind of you need to put priority on it. And again, if the other topic of hypergrowth, you can't grow if you don't bring people in.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? So yeah, I think instinctually it's not something people are comfortable with. Like most companies, I don't think a lot of people walk into companies and they say, okay, we're hiring a couple hundred people,
yeah,
like you should, you need to kind of really get into that mode, right? So my first 3 months, I think at Miro, I did 60 interviews, and that's something that's just not, most people don't go through that process. That's not normal, right? That's also part of this kind of hypergrowth.
But also expectations are really important, right? I mean, you're blessed in a way that the product has gotten in such a momentum, right, that you're not really worried about underperforming, right, in your metrics, right, because the product is just like overperforming like crazy and it's just growing and growing and growing. But that also puts a little bit of pressure because when you come in a new business, also people tend to expect results fast, or you think coming in a new business that people expect results fast from you. So the temptation to like spend the most possible time in those like lower hanging fruits where you can show like a metric like skyrocketing, it's important, but you need to like be, mature enough to realize that you might be able to like say and communicate, hey, set the right expectations. My metrics are not going to go anywhere because I need to spend the first 3 months really hiring people, and then I can focus on this, right? And what's tricky for me is that hiring is just the beginning of this, because you need to onboard the hell out of these people. Right? Like no matter how much of a senior developer you get or a senior engineer or product manager or whatever it is, we all learn our jobs in the job. Every company is different. Everything is different. So you have simultaneously like constantly recruiting new people, onboarding the ones you just hired, and trying to get the ones that are already into the team to be up and going. Like if you would have to like, I don't know, give like random percentages of how your time it's dedicated to each one of those, how much time do you think goes into each bucket, right? Like hiring, onboarding, and running the team?
Yeah, no, I think once you kind of get past this mentality that, you can do everything or you can execute and you kind of focus on hiring, then you start to realize that, okay, couple hours I spend a week is not good enough. You need to spend every day, dedicate some time to doing it.
Yeah.
And then, as you said, as you bring people on, make sure that they understand the roadmap, the strategy, the team, who's who in the organization, which is also continuing to evolve. So there's this kind of training aspect that you're constantly going through. And I think the bigger you grow as an organization, or the higher you go in an organization, being a people manager is very important. There's a skill in people management that I don't think gets talked about too much. I think if you think of product or you think of marketing, you think of the strategy, you think of like kind of the fun things, but the people manager part is very important, because if you have the right people there, they're the ones that are going to help you execute that vision and strategy you might have, right? So for me, it's also been a learning point that just spending time to hire, to onboard, all those things is super important, and not just people on my team, right? Like if I see a newcomer come in where I think, hey, I can help them, kind of cut the learning curve that I went through, or point them in the right direction. Again, I feel like that's my responsibility to do that, and So I've done that as well. As new people have come in other departments, and I see hey, I can point them in the right direction, or here's some resources. I think that's
one part
the
of
way to
it.
go about it.
Yeah, I mean, one part of it is just being a nice guy, right? Which well, you think you are, you're not really, but you're a nice guy. But that one part of it is just natural, and the other one is that also there is some sort of like an intelligent strategy, because a social currency in a company is very important, and the more you can help people, the more people will help you. And our jobs very much rely on building bridges between departments. You're never just going to be able to execute on your own. So the better you can get along with people, and the more you can do them a favor here and there and cooperate. This is why sometimes it's hard for us to say no, because at some point that comes back to you, right? It's not that you do it because of that, but it does naturally come back to you eventually when you need something, or when you need to push a project or something like that. So I think having that more long-term mentality when it comes to people, it's also super important, because people don't forget those nice gestures, right? When they first join a company.
Yeah, and my philosophy has always been, at the end of the day, you can have a project that has like a limited scope or time frame, right? That let's say you have a project, you develop it, you execute it, you launch it. That is kind of a finite thing, but this going back and working with the same people is infinite, right? Like there's going to be hundreds or thousands of projects with the same people that you need to interact with, right? And I think that's the most important part that kind of people forget, that stuff might go wrong, but at the end of the day, there are people that more than likely, if you think about if everyone's circle of work, right, they have to work with every day repeatedly over and over. And for that comes down to good relationships, communication, all those things that we've talked about. So that's just something you kind of have to continually develop, right?
Yeah, and what's also interesting about this hyper growth hiring, it's that I've also been in this stage before in my life where companies are just doubling and doubling, and it creates a lot of challenges for the organization. But what's interesting is that there's an assumption, in my belief, a fallacy, that more people means faster by default. You'll be able to execute faster the more people you get. But that is only right when you're having processes in place that allow you to do that. Because if you don't, very often it is actually slower, right? If you had one guy that, maybe completely a bit overworked, right, but could handle it all together and didn't have to get approval from anybody, could handle something from beginning to end, and then you break his tasks into little areas, and you're like, you handle this, you handle the other, you're creating these codependencies on roles and things like that, that sometimes even slows some functions, right? So have you had these kind of experiences in the past, and how are you trying to avoid this situation now that you guys are scaling so quickly?
Yeah, I think in general, right, the rule of thumb I've always heard is that it takes you kind of 3 months to get coordinated in a company. It takes you about 6 months to get coordinated in your role. It takes you about 12 months to understand your industry, right? And I think that's people kind of forget that sometimes, that you're going to hire, but then there's going to be this dip, and then hopefully this productivity. So you're hiring not for now, which is dangerous. I think companies do that, right? They think they can bring in someone and then they'll help them right away, and they don't realize there's this kind of onboarding and learning process that needs to happen first, right? So hopefully the hiring you're doing now is you're predicting kind of for this future output and strategies that you're supporting, but that dip will happen.
Yeah, right? Exactly, right?
You can hire the most senior person, and then that dip will happen, and then that's just kind of in a normal scenario. And then you add the different layer of you're growing fast, you're adding a lot of people that that you're going to continue to get to know, and then that adds another level of complexity, right? So in a perfect world, let's say it takes someone there's that 3, 6 month and 12-month periods to really know the company, know their role, know the industry, and then you add other complexities to it, and then it's I think you just have to be realistic about it.
But what also leads to, I think, to over-hiring in some scenarios, right, is that you feel like, hey, we've got money now, we're growing, we've got the people, let's just aim for the world, right? And then you start saying, why don't we just start a side business, a side whatever? We have the people. Let's do more. And often, the majority of the growth of business comes from few places, right? From very clear places. So you have the option of either like tripling down on those and like really going for it for like maximizing them, or you have the temptation of saying, oh man, we could also use this for that, and we could also use this whiteboard for this other thing, and you start all of a sudden like losing your focus, trying to be, the whiteboard for everybody in the planet when it could be only for a few people that do this function or the other, and on that. On that idea, you also end up over hiring because you're like, oh, now we need another team to manage this part of the product. We need another team to manage this part of the product. And sometimes you haven't even maximized the growth in one area. I think you guys are probably very focused in this direction, but is this something that you guys have discussed or something that's in your radar to avoid happening? Because I also think the temptation it's there, right? Especially when your pockets are getting full and you see like you can take over the world. The temptation to do so, it's very big.
Yeah, I think that conversation boils down to your strategy, right? You're always revisiting, like you have a vision obviously of where you think you can go, but how you get there is going to be different, and that can change on a moment's notice, as we saw with COVID and what happened with the business at Miro. So with that, I think that the thing is that you have to have some strategic bets, obviously, that you're placing, and you have to know where you're going, and you have to be confident in that direction.
Yeah.
And I've worked at companies where there was a strategic bet placed, there was resources brought in for that strategic bet, and the bet was not what we thought it was, right? In other companies, so it does happen, but you kind of have to also think bigger picture. I think if you're thinking, the dangerous situation is if you're thinking short term and then hiring that way. But if you're thinking long term and hiring that way, then I think you're a bit more in a comfort zone. And then it ultimately comes down to you put faith in your hiring managers and leaders to bring in the people they need and want, and they can prove value, and that's important too. It can't be this kind of open scenario where everyone's bringing everybody in, and
that's such a challenge.
No rhyme or reason.
Yeah, but that's such a challenge. Like, how long do you spend in average with a candidate before you hire them, right? Like in time, if you've had to put it in a time bucket, like maybe 2 hours or maybe a bit more. Like
before we hire them.
Yeah, how long do you spend with them actually speaking to them?
Like personally or through the organization side?
No, yourself. Yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah. Like, so probably 2 hours, I would say. Like, there's a screening, there's
right.
And then the rest. Yeah, but then it goes back to kind of this. You have to trust your colleagues to vet the process,
of course.
And you need to be very clear with your hiring committee. What the must-haves are for a candidate for your role, what the nice-to-haves are. So it goes back to, I think, as a hiring manager, educating the group that's helping you.
Yeah.
To assess everything, because otherwise you won't have time, right? Again, let's say the hiring process is altogether 7 hours or 10 hours in interviews. There's no way you could do that yourself, right? So you need to put trust in people that they can evaluate qualities for your team as well.
And also, what's interesting is that when you're hiring, like, one thing is the job description, and another thing is who you end up bringing in. Right? Very often it's not exactly as it is on paper. Like, I very rarely most jobs I've gotten, I didn't fit the job description perfectly, right? And as you start bringing new pieces in, then your whole notion of who you want to bring in next might change, because as a manager, you want to like leverage the strengths of your team. And as you see them working, you're like, hey, this guy has this side of him that I didn't know. He's really good at this. So then we might get somebody else to fill in this gap and to fill. So that constantly evolves as well, right? Because if you're fixed and you say in January, from here to December, I want to hire these 20 roles. And as people come in, you don't adapt the new roles, then you might be shooting yourself in the foot, right? Because there's like people come in and bring new skills, and you start leveraging strengths that you didn't think they would have, and you need to fill in the gaps with other people, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think, but there's also a limit to that, right? You're bringing in someone typically for a certain function, or a certain part of to help a certain part of the business or a certain part of the strategy. So ideally, that the person you hire is helping you in a very focused area.
Yeah.
And during that time, you learn about what else they bring to the organization or to the team, and you potentially expand their opportunities or put them in a better position. But I think that initial, let's say, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years is really in a focused area, right? So, and these are good problems to have too, right? If you someone
happy problems,
they have they have like other skills that they can help you out. I mean, that's kind of the type of people you also want to end up hiring. So.
Yeah. All right, man. We start to wrap it up now because it's already going to be an hour. It went really fast. We've got a few last minutes to share some resources. Usually we ask us to send podcasts, TV shows, whatever you feel like sharing. Do you have something under your sleeve that you want to share with people?
Yeah, it's funny. So the way I've looked at resources have changed in the last few years. I really look at things where in areas that I need help. So I used to, let's say, consume in a blanket fashion things, right? So everything about product, let's say, or strategy. And now if there's areas where I want to focus on or work on, I look at specific things, and I think that's super helpful. And so for me, from a product perspective, like Mind the Product or anything from Marty Kagan, I typically go to. So if I need to find something specific, I go there. The other thing I've found interesting, and I've done it for the last 3 years, is really read autobiographies. So I just
super cool.
Just finished.
I agree.
Yeah, I just finished Ride of a Lifetime, which was Robert Iger, the CEO of Disney, his autobiography, and it's interesting because if you read these autobiographies, you can see this decision-making process someone went through and the risks they took and things like that, right?
Yeah.
So prior to that, I had read Titan, which is the autobiography of John D. Rockefeller, which is it's a huge book, but it's interesting because if you read this book, you see that in retrospect, people think, okay, yeah, oil, of course, it was it's a bet anyone should have placed, but he took an immense risk, right? He had this long-term bet on the market and what he wanted to do, and actually there was a point where he could have lost everything. And so there's this, you can kind of see these things that people pick up, right? They have this very strong vision of what they think the world's going to be like. They have a conviction in what they're doing, so they can make decisions. So I always encourage people to kind of look at autobiographies. I
agree, man. I had this conversation with some friends as well. Like, for example, like the Steve Jobs one. I'm not a massive fan of Steve Jobs or anything, but it's basically a story about the entire computer industry, right? So there's so much milestones that you go through it, like that are so beyond you liking the guy or you not liking the guy. And also not only people in your terrain, as you were saying, like there's also an Einstein one from the same author that I think is super interesting. So good recommendation. I wanted to give I usually say books, but then Sujan on the last episode named every book I've ever read when I told him to share one episode. So I don't have any books more. I have to catch up with my reading. So I wanted to share a podcast which I think is highly related to what we were talking about today. It's called Work Life with Adam Grant. He's an author. He wrote the book Originals, which I think is a very popular book. But this is a podcast created by TED. So it's a part of the TED Talks podcasts. And it's basically essentially all about work-life balance. He's a psychologist, so it's super interesting insights for anybody who in this day, I think this includes like 90% of the population struggling with boundaries and work-life balance in a pandemic. I would really recommend to give that one a check. All right, my man. It's been great to have you. Thank you so much for joining me. I called you last minute and you were up for it, so you're a champ. And I thank you, and I was really happy to have you here with me today.
Thanks, Nacho. Really appreciate the opportunity, and enjoyed the chat.
All right, man. Thank you. Have a good day, everybody. Bye-bye.
Growth Pains.